Hello everyone, my name is Ben and welcome back to Pass the Aux Chord, a channel where Muse have definitely been a hit on here, both for me and for you. All of my Muse reactions to this point have a lot of support, and of course I do appreciate that from you all. And I was doing a set of polls, and it came out as the result that we would be reacting to the debut from Muse today called Showbiz, and it is sitting at 13 songs, 54 minutes, about the typical length. It's looking like the rest of the Muse albums we've listened to so far. I think the cover looks really interesting. I've been kind of looking at this one, wanting to hear what they offered up the first time around, and if we do end up covering the rest from Muse, I will be just going in order from here forth, so of course let me know if you want to see that below too. Quickly, I just want to plug something before we get into the reaction. We have 2 episodes now out of Past the Podcast. We talk about some of the new music from the last month and a half. We've covered quite a few albums on there already. On the last one, we covered the new Bring Me the Horizon EP and the new singles from System of a Down, so that might be particularly interesting to you. And if any of that sounded interesting at all, the playlist will be linked in the description below that has both of the episodes on there. So without any further rambling, let's get straight into this because I am excited to see what Muse served up the first time on Sunburn. Opening up with a piano-driven song by the looks of it, which is something that would continue to happen. I'm seeing the title of the album playing into this already. Okay. Much bassier presentation on this one, I've noticed already. This does sound very Muse, but you can tell that this was early on in them developing the sound that they would carry out. Okay, this is an interesting guitar part here. Kind of a solo? Yeah, we were leading into this, alright. Bellamy sounds kind of drowned out here, despite being very emotive, obviously. Like, it's kind of muffled effect almost over his voice. Very interesting, their much heavier use of pianos on this track. Okay, so this track seems like a pretty solid introduction to what might end up being the themes and big ideas around the album. Maybe, you know, we'll see as we go along, that is anyways, because this is definitely some sort of commentary on fame, or at least the rich people in the very high-class environments, and this person seems to be part of that, but they're very ashamed of something, which might kind of come to a couple different conclusions to the listener here. They've clearly done something immoral, possibly, to gain their fortune or notoriety, whatever it may be. And another thing that you could kind of tie in from that very sentiment there is that money can't buy you happiness necessarily, and if there's something nagging away at you, then that is going to cause you a lot of grief regardless of what you can pay for. There's definitely some very metaphorical speaking all throughout the track though, and I feel like my interpretation is pretty vague, but you get the overarching idea, I guess, of what this might end up being about. I thought this song was pretty stripped back in comparison to the very sci-fi, like, space rock as they kind of pioneered that genre. Simultaneously very atmospheric sound that they would come to much later on in their career. This seemed like it didn't have a whole lot of things going on at once, which is very interesting to hear on a Muse song. There was a lot of pianos going on that track, which is of course something that would be integrated later on, so it's still cool to see it here, but it seemed almost entirely driven by that. And the drumming was okay, it was there, and you had some guitar stuff going on that was a little bit more abstract than I guess a typical rock band might be, but it still felt a little bit less leaning on that kind of theatrical, dramatic sound that they would come to much later on. It felt like most of the unique qualities of this song relied on the effects that, and you know, like I said before, there's some sort of effect on Matt's voice making him sound muffled even to that degree. Okay song though, for sure. Next one we got on here is Muscle Museum, and a little thing that I read on the side here that's somewhat interesting is the fact those are the words that would come before and after Muse in a dictionary. Much crisper instrumentation on this one already. I'm liking that. Totally different sound to the playing on this one. Oh god. You know, these riffs just don't feel as heavy and impactful as I want though. This chorus is still pretty good though. That's a interesting lyric right there. There's something about the mixing on this record so far that just feels very restrained. Sounds really good here though. Okay. Here's some of that sci-fi shit, alright. This song lyrically I find kind of interesting and simultaneously kind of pretentious. I feel like what we got going on here is, at least in this first verse, they're likening their relationship to the music that they're making as kind of a toxic relationship that would be going on between two people, as that's kind of what seems to be going on in the lyrics in a literal sense, but then it becomes more obvious what the metaphor is going forward in the song as they describe what they've gone through to get up to this point where they're making this album. There's a lot of talk of being ignored, a lot of talk of playing small shows to nobody, or at least that's what I'm getting from certain phrases in here, and that seems to be what they're trying to get across, is that they've been ignored for too long and people just aren't getting it, so they're gonna try to make people get it on this particular track, or maybe this album in general, since we're still pretty early on it. That might be kind of the thesis that we're going for. But this also could make reference to the title wrapping back around to that Showbiz theme, in that they're trying to enter the showbiz, the entertainment industry, and it's not really working up until this point, and they're getting frustrated with it, things like that. But you know, my only complaint with this is the way that it feels kind of like they're just on a high horse a little bit. Every band has a time where they're going to just have a hard time getting started, especially if you're someone trying to reach a very high level of commercial success, as they showed up to do later in their discography, of course. So that's why it kind of seems a little bit, like I said, I guess I'll use the word pretentious again to act like you shouldn't have gone through a struggle to make it as a band. But that's only if all of my interpretations were correct, and it very easily could be not correct anyways. This song definitely has the typical Muse style that was kind of missing from the last one, or at least that one was just a little bit different for them. I guess it wasn't really different for them because there wasn't a lot that came before this, but you know what I mean. It just kind of seemed a little bit irregular compared to what they would make later, as where this one definitely fits in. And I feel like the subverting expectations on the second track is definitely a motif we saw later on in the other albums as well. It seems like most of these have a second track that just kind of wows and surprises you. And in this case, other than the intro that sounded very interesting, especially in the tuning of the strings on there, this one didn't like blow me away, but I've also heard a lot of the stuff that came well after this where they had refined the style a little bit better. But yeah, again, I just don't get what it is about how certain things sound kind of muffled in the mix. Last time it was Matt's vocals, this time it kind of seemed like it was the guitars in certain sections. I'm not sure if it's kind of an effect that they're going for, but I don't really see it as working that well because it just doesn't bang as hard that way. Fillip is the next one, and I think that's a name but I'm kind of skeptical because it's spelled different. Well, maybe the song's about Fillip. We'll see. I don't know who Fillip is, but I want to hear about him. Again, this is much more indicative of what they would become. Okay, that's pretty cool. And again, sounds kind of muffled here. The drumming is kind of tinny, unfortunately. Giving me plug-in baby vibes right now. I dig it.
To me it is strange, this feeling is strange, but it's not gonna change for anybody at all.
Very interesting change up going on here. Alright, going on quite a build up here. Despite it not sounding as good, this is still a satisfying payoff for sure. I mean, it works. Alright. Apparently, I should have just checked into this before I went into it, but I didn't figure the word Fillip was a word, and I figured it was just a different spelling of the name. But apparently the word Fillip means something that adds up to stimulation or enjoyment. It also is the word for the action of pushing the thumb and fingertip, usually the middle finger, together until they give way to another, producing a cracking sound, sometimes known as clicking or snapping finger. What do you mean sometimes, dude? It's called snapping. The latter meaning seems to tie in somewhat with the song's meaning, since producing a Fillip suggests calling for immediacy. It's happening soon. It's happening soon. Yeah, okay, so that does make sense as to why the song would be called that, and it definitely seems very Muse to come up with some obscurely known word and make that the title of the song. I feel like there's other ones that have been like that before. Yeah, they've definitely used big, intelligent, big brain words before. That's definitely a thing that's happened before. Now that I'm thinking about it, the more and more I do. That one definitely felt more like home again. This definitely was incredibly indicative of their later sound, but like I said, certain things on there, they did not have the mixing down quite like they did later, even just one album later on Origin of Symmetry. I think that album sounds fantastic. Everything on there is really hit in professional lens, is very masterfully crafted in post-production, whereas this one, I feel like they were playing their instruments pretty good, but when it came down to brass tacks, I don't think that this is going to be a very well mixed project, unfortunately, because those drums were pretty tinny. I feel like some of the vocals on there were a little bit staticky, almost kind of scratchiness going on here, because this really feels like Origin of Symmetry. It just doesn't have that craftsmanship to it. But I do think that the way that this song built up, like I said, this reminded me a lot of Plug-in Baby, where it had almost this like specifically early 2000s rock, and I suppose that's exactly where they are, but early 2000s rock vibe to it. It's just a certain sound that you become familiarized with if you're, fan of music from that area of time. It really, really has that, but it's still pretty theatrical and dynamic the way that Muse would tend to be later. As far as lyrically what this song is about, I have just about nothing as far as specifics, but the term that is brought up in the title is pretty much summing it all up for you. Our narrator is eagerly anticipating something that needs to happen soon, so maybe this is just resonating on deadlines, on finishing projects, on trying to break through into the showbiz if we're tying it all back together, but I don't really feel like we need to. It's about waiting for something, very impatiently waiting for something, I guess. Falling Down is the next one. This is sounding like a western, dude. This is cool. Really be on them falsettos right now.
They were all begging for your dreams.
Pardon?
Looking for, you know it.
Ooh, those little subtle piano notes there. Cool, cool.
So I'm cruel. It's too late. I already found what I was looking for.
Damn, dude, stripped back Muse is growing on me. Jeez. He was really getting in his more stressed part of his vocal range on this project. Just to talk about lyrical content first, because it's made very blatantly obvious, especially now with annotations to clear up exactly what he's talking about at any point in time. This is Matt Bellamy's song about not liking his hometown, more specifically than track 2, Muscle Museum, that one was. He's like specifically naming numbers of the population and houses that were in this small town that he grew up in, and just really seems to hate it there and seems to hate the people there. And this probably kind of stems from not getting any notoriety, recognition, or anything like that in his hometown. This song is just about coming out of this shitty little town and making it big, which again ties into the same themes we've already talked about, blah blah blah, it goes on and on. But sonically, that song was very out of the ordinary for Muse. I feel like the only one that I can kind of liken this to that I've heard in their discography so far is Thoughts of a Dying Atheist. As far as I remember, that one was pretty similar in how it sounded, very stripped back, but had more emotive sections where the instrumental did build up a little bit. Still, the mixing is an issue, but that song sounded pretty beautiful just in and of itself, the way that it was for what it is. It was really beautifully orchestrated. Orchestrated? Is orchestrated a word? I think so. That was very beautifully orchestrated. The song just had some very clear, definitive parts. It had a front, middle, end thing going on. He came to a very solid conclusion at the end. Very beautifully put together track, and that's definitely my favorite on the project so far. Thinking about some of the deeper cuts where it was a little bit more stripped back instrumentally, this is still indicative of some of their later sound that they would bring to the table. Cave is the next one. This one looks like it's a single, I think. Also, fun fact, this is my first time realizing that they're an English band and not American. So, that's something for you, I guess. Okay. Got some gritty riffs. Okay. It's not a phase, Mom. You know, this is pretty good, I like it, but I feel like they didn't necessarily master the technique of the dramatic chorus yet. Guitar work on this record is pretty solid though. The song specifically, that is. The drums are punchier here too. That bass line is something. Some very subtle piano additions there. Got a little bit of an instrumental, like, outro here. Pretty cool, alright. And it actually kind of transitioned on that sound, which is interesting as well. Lyrically speaking, this is another one that has been brought out very clearly and in a literal fashion, that is, I guess. And this idea came from a movie where apparently men were going into a cave when they were stressed or something like that. I mean, the annotations on there, well, the bio, I guess, is on screen right now. You can read it for yourself. I guess it's kind of a commentary on how men deal with their emotions, and they found that interesting and made it into a song. Interesting song topic, I guess. It doesn't necessarily come across in any kind of unique way when it's put out in the song. You know, it's pretty much a repeated phrasing of the same thing, I guess, but at the same time, you know, it's still kind of a cool concept. I'll give them the points for that, I guess. Again, this really just sounds like Muse, though. It's got some pretty sick instrumental parts, as usual, I guess, with them. This one definitely seems like one of the best mixed on here so far, likely because it's a single, and I feel like maybe a little bit more money and work were put into the singles, because I did sort of notice that on Sunburn, although a little bit less. Overall, though, I feel like these singles were going to run into them kind of being the less memorable ones of the batch. The best ones, from like an objective sense, are probably going to stand lower in the discography just because I've heard more interesting takes on the sound that they were developing on what I've heard from, you know, the more Muse sounding tracks, I guess. Showbiz, the title track, is the next one and the last one we're going to look at in part 1. Very brooding atmosphere to this. This is definitely the typical build-up. Waiting for the payoff here. Ooh, that's kind of nice. The muffled sound kind of adds to it here. This is a lot darker than a lot of the stuff that's been on here, alright. I feel like Matt is really not holding back on some of the songs here. The riffage is pretty sick here, man. Alright, cool. Well, I feel like that one's pretty straightforward too. Definitely about meeting expectations and feeling like you're held up to a certain standard. Once again, this is still a lot about them finding their identity, their audience, and finding their place in the music industry, where it's very cutthroat and hard to make it out without having a very specific set of things that make you more commercially viable in the eyes of label executives or just a general audience, I guess. I think the dark, kind of edgy sound of that one really fit well with the lyricism that was given alongside it. Definitely felt like a frustrating sounding song, and the lyrics that matched it were just as frustrating, of course, or frustrated. That is, it's not frustrating to the listener, but he's singing about things that are making him frustrated. You get my point by now. Yeah, actually a fairly unique song for sure out of their catalog. I feel like having a very early Muse project in front of us here is kind of resulting in the outcome of having some stuff that just sounds like less developed versions of the sound that they would go on to chase later on, and some stuff that also kind of more feels like the same band for sure, but totally different ideas than they expressed otherwise. And I feel like on every project to some degree there has been some songs that totally break the mold for them, but they do have a pretty distinct sound and style that they stick with, and some of these songs on here so far have really went outside of that range, so I do find that pretty interesting. But yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes next. Part 2 will be out tomorrow at some time, so do stay tuned for that. I will meet you over there, and drop a like on the video if you did like what you saw today. Subscribe to the channel for more music-related content coming your way. Hit the bell for notifications so you can be one of the first people to see Part 2. But that is just about going to wrap it up for this one, and I will see you in the next video.